joining us today. For those who don't know, my name is Ian Hitchcock. I'm an organizer of the Vermont Natural Resources Council. Together with my colleagues Becca Custer and Johanna Miller, both on this call, we help to coordinate VECAN, Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network. And this is the third of our monthly kind of lunch and learn series, where we are trying to both present information about topics that we think will be of interest to Energy Committee leaders from around the state, but also importantly, give you all time to connect with each other and have discussions and kind of share ideas kind of in a peer-to-peer way. And so we are excited to really lean into that approach today. A lot of what we are going to be doing today is offering a kind of sneak preview of some thinking around communications and outreach strategies guidance that we've been developing for Energy Committees as VECAN partners. And we want to kind of share with you all briefly what we're thinking, the sorts of things we are hoping to offer in a way that is useful to y'all, and then give you guys space to talk to each other and to us about kind of what are some of the successful communications and outreach strategies that you've employed in your communities, what kinds of resources and support would you need to take your efforts to the next level, and just generally see what we can learn from each other about how communications and outreach works well on the Energy Committee level. Because one of the things that we often tell ourselves as VECAN partners, and it's always a good reminder, is that we really are not the experts when it comes to your towns and your communities. All of you know them better than we ever could. And so when it comes to thinking about what communications and outreach strategies make sense in your communities, you all know your towns, your local context better than we could. And so what works in one town may not work in another. And we want to make sure that we are kind of providing a baseline of resources and guidance for you guys to think about, but then really, enabling and empowering all of y'all to, thoughtfully go out and spread the good word about the need for the, renewable energy transition and how that can benefit both Vermont's climate and people in really meaningful ways. So very briefly, and we'll put these down in writing in a follow-up email to this, but as we've been developing these kind of communications and outreach strategies, first of all, we're focusing on this in part because we recognize that the pandemic has really forced a lot of the usual strategies that energy committees employ, from tabling to holding local community events, to really go on the back burner, where it hasn't been safe for folks to gather in person. And so we thought that it was a good time to try to take a step back and think about, how energy committees can communicate effectively, both during the pandemic, and then hopefully have some of that thinking and those practices inform when the pandemic does end and folks are able to go back to some more of the kind of in-person organizing that is energy committees' bread and butter, as we well know. So just a few of the kind of guiding principles and things that we, from our perspective, working with different energy committees and in different stages of this work all around the state, have been thinking about as far as things to keep in mind that are can be kind of keys to success for an energy committee's community outreach. And one of them is keeping, updating, and growing a contact list, email, phone of people in your communities, making sure you've got both your list of community members, but also a secondary list of community members who've expressed interest in the work, but may not be actually members of the Energy Committee itself. Making sure that you are emailing that list periodically as it grows, and as you have kind of opportunities for your community to engage in a project or a funding opportunity or what have you. Developing an inventory, thinking about ways to get the word out in your communities, and divvying up those tasks when it's time to promote an event based on kind of who has connections where, and we'll talk about that in a bit more depth. If possible, updating and maintaining a website, an online presence, so that if folks are going around the wilds of the internet looking for ways to work on energy, that they can find you all and have a way to connect with you that way. And then along those lines, having a way for the public to contact you and be added to that contact list, like an Energy Committee email address. And then when it is safe to do so, using kind of public events as a way to help build that list of contacts and also get to know the folks in your community. So Jon, at this point, I am happy to turn things over to you if you are able, and I will make you a co-host here in a second to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the resources that we've been cooking up.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones. Really appreciate that intro. I think we really want to turn it over pretty quickly to you all to hear from you, but I wanted to give you a quick overview. And I want to actually give a hat tip or a nod. You know, some of my thinking on this actually comes from some work I did in Randolph a few years ago. They participated in our Climate Economy Model Communities program. And we were in the process of promoting a workshop in Randolph. And somebody around the table, a guy named Andre, was like, you know, we do this all the time as an energy committee. We are always sort of building communications campaigns to promote a workshop, to promote Button Up, to promote sort of the latest and greatest thing. And it seems like we ought to systematize this a little bit so that we're not sort of reinventing it every time we go. And so this, and since then, I've actually had members of my Climate Catalyst program, the Climate Catalyst program we organize, doing similar work of thinking about, okay, how do we effectively engage our community and communicate with them? And so what we're doing, the VCAN partners, is really trying to build a toolkit to support that work, to make it as efficient and effective as it can be. And I think Ian sort of gave you a quick overview that's really helpful, which is, you know, the first thing, and this is different for every community, is really building that inventory of resources. And like, I'll give you an example. Some places, in some towns, virtually everybody in that town is on Front Porch Forum. In other places, you ask them and they're like, yeah, there's a few people in this town that are on Front Porch Forum, but it's not really that popular. Or maybe you've got the Vital Communities listserv in your community that people are really active on. That's the kind of local sort of knowledge that's really helpful in building a communications plan. Another example of that is, you know, let's say you're producing a flyer for a workshop. Where do you put it up? Like, there is often, in my experience, you ask around in an energy committee and somebody just has a catalog in their head of where all the bulletin boards in town are. That's a really useful piece of information, and it's worth writing that information down, because maybe that person who's got that catalog is going to move out of town, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, where are all the bulletin boards? We've got to recreate that list. Rather than recreating that from scratch, it makes sense to build that inventory, document that. I'll give you one more example. A lot of schools have a newsletter. And that newsletter is a really great way to get in front of your families in your school. Different schools have different rules and different deadlines for what it takes to get into that school newsletter. It makes sense to figure it out in your community. And once you've figured it out, how to get into that weekly Wednesday newsletter, write it down so that you're not recreating that every time you want to put it into action. So that's really a first step, is how do you build an inventory of all of those different resources that you have at your fingertips that you want to activate in a communications plan. A second step is, let's say you decide you're going to have an electric vehicle workshop, a Zoom workshop, and you want to build a plan to build as much participation in that workshop as you can. You just build a schedule and you figure out who's going to do what. Let's say you start 6 weeks ahead of when the event's going to happen. How do you really build that plan and assign the tasks to people on your team and just sort of implement? It's really just an implementation challenge. And then finally, the third piece is, how do you learn every time you implement one of those communications plans? Try to learn from it such that you're adjusting your inventory and improving it as you go. So the things that we're trying to develop to give you these tools are just a little brief toolkit that describes this, but then a couple of worksheets. One worksheet will be a series of questions that help you build your own inventory. You know, it'll be like a question about the bulletin boards. It might be a question about the transfer station. That is like a hidden gem for a lot of places in terms of how to connect with their communities, is to go stand at the dump on a Saturday morning, or maybe it's the PO, maybe it's the post office for everybody checking their PO boxes. So essentially, we'll give you a questionnaire that helps you work through that list and build that inventory that is yours. And then we'll have another worksheet that says, okay, how do you take that inventory and translate it into a specific plan for something that you're doing in your community? Maybe it's promoting a workshop, or maybe it's a campaign to get people to take advantage of a new incentive for weatherization or something like that. The idea is we're trying to build these things in a general enough way that you all will find them useful, and you're building a resource that has value. And I want to just mention one other thing quickly, which I think we often forget with communications. Your most valuable asset as an energy committee is your list. Names and email addresses are priceless to you because you can communicate to those people free of charge with whatever frequency you choose. And so when you're thinking about your work and your communications plan, always be thinking, how are we building our list? Every time you have a workshop or you're tabling at the farmer's market, you have that checklist that you're sending around or you're asking people to sign up for. Some of that list is your core committee of members, but a lot of that list is just interested community members who you want to be able to reach out to when you have an opportunity that you want to let them know. So that's really what we're working on building, is that sort of toolkit with some of those. And actually, I want to mention one other thing that we're working on, which is a few specific sort of one-pagers about how to use things effectively. For example, Front Porch Forum. You know, there's some recommendations in terms of how to compose an effective Front Porch Forum post. Or if you're hosting an event, does it make sense to use the Facebook events function to help promote that event? And if you're going to do that, how do you do that effectively? So we want to produce that go along with this inventory tool and this planning tool. We're producing some of those one-pagers that just give you the quick recommendations for how to use these different tools effectively. Another one is like cable access. We have these wonderful cable access stations around the state, and they are there to serve their communities. So that's another example of the kind of tools that we want to be sure that people are using and accessing to the maximum, let's say. So that's kind of an overview of the work. And I think, Ian, I'm going to look to you, but I think what we really want to do is sort of, as we get going on this and we're in the process of building this, we'd love to get a sense from you all of what's useful. Do you think that's going to be helpful? And how can you help guide these efforts?
And thank you so much for that helpful overview, John. And I won't target folks too much longer, but just to quickly build on some of that. Again, we really want to learn from all of y'all, right? This is not a one-way street where like we are the experts and have all the information and know how to do communications well and can just share that with y'all. But like we want to learn from you guys about kind of your on-the-ground experiences of trying some of these things in various forms, what's worked, what hasn't, and use all of that good thinking to inform what we provide and to teach each other. So we, you know, as we're developing this, you know, Becca, if you'd be willing to throw in the chat now some of the guiding questions. In a moment, we are going to go into breakout rooms, and I will be doing a little bit of finagling to be making sure we've got a VCAN partner in each room. So folks just kind of bear with me for a few moments as I make sure we do that. But some of the questions we wanted to have kind of guide the conversation in these breakouts are: one, what outreach strategies have been successful for your energy committee in the past and why? Two, what kinds of community outreach would your energy committee like to do in the future? And three, what kinds of support and resources do you think would be helpful to take your community outreach to the next level? And that can be, yeah, I love what you guys are talking about. That all sounds great. Or if there's something we haven't thought of, or some aspect of a thing that feels like it'd be particularly helpful to you, I think that would be great. I'm, you know, seeing someone put in a question about how people share Zoom meeting videos, for instance. And, you know, I could see us doing a future, you know, a bit meta, but like Zoom meeting about how to Zoom meeting, right? In pandemic times to try to help guide that. I will say kind of, you know, I'm happy to connect Jeff with you maybe offline to get that question just so we can get things moving here. But one other idea I wanted to seed for folks before we go into those breakouts is another thought we've been bandying around as the VCAN partners is, wouldn't it be interesting if there were a formal energy committee role where there might be a point person who kind of took the lead on orchestrating communications plans and like making sure that things were executed. Like, well, like just like how, you know, at the organization I work for at VNRC, like we have a communications director. What if like similar to having an energy committee have like a chair and a vice chair and, you know, maybe a liaison with select board, like would it make sense for there to be a role of someone who focuses on kind of communications and outreach that we could help support in more depth? So just wanting to float that idea with y'all. Before we do go into breakouts, I would like to just give a few minutes for if folks have just any questions about what we've laid out in front of the full group, and then I'll split us up. So I believe folks should be able to unmute themselves, try to raise their hands. I can't quite see everyone at once. So if you're doing you know, a little jig to try to get my attention, I may not see you. So go ahead and feel free to speak up.
I have something to say. We collected a pretty good size email list so far that we hope to build on. However, we didn't collect phone numbers, and as Jeff just sent a chat to put phone numbers on the email list, because sometimes you want to do a person-to-person calling just to rev things up, and it's very useful to have their phone numbers as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for that addition, Nancy. It's a whole different, a phone call from a community member is a whole different level of interaction than an email out of the blue. So I appreciate that thinking. Anyone else have something to add? I'll hold for a few moments and then.
This is Linda Gray. I have this general question to ask people, which is whether they actually make much use of Facebook. I have been a combination dinosaur and then suspicious, increasingly suspicious of Facebook. So we don't have any Facebook presence at all, and so I'm just wondering though, what other people find. Do they find it's like, yes, it's really useful and don't worry about problems with Facebook, or what?
Well, I can talk about our experience. This is Fran Putnam from the Weybridge Energy Committee. We've had a Facebook page for a long time, ever since we first started, but we've never really found that many people coming to it, even though every time we do any publicity, we say, please visit our Facebook page. We just don't have a lot of clicks. So we are in the process of creating a website, which is on our town website. So it's free for us to do our own page. And so we're working on that right now, and we're hoping that that might be a little more effective. So I'm curious to see if other people have websites, if they find them useful, and how they drive people to the website.
Yeah, so obviously have some thoughts, but this is the exact sort of conversation that we're hoping can take place in the breakouts. I think it's the exact sort of back and forth that we would love to see. So a reminder to the partners, I'll ask you to kind of help guide the conversation through the breakouts, and then it being very critical today to make sure that we've got either you or someone in that group assigned to take notes so that we can capture the good thinking and suggestions that folks have to inform our future planning. So at this point, I'm going to kind of randomly assign folks to breakout rooms, and then I'll do some shuffling to make sure we've got a partner in each one, and then we can keep these conversations going in a smaller format. So give me just a second, and I will try to make sure that we've got a good mix of participants in each room. So those rooms are being created